Has it ever crossed your mind how a country plunges into a state of turmoil and political unrest? This is a question that many ponder, but few fully grasp. To understand this complex process, we need to delve into the intricacies of political turmoil. Firstly, let's explore what we mean by political turmoil. It's a state of great disturbance, confusion, or uncertainty in a country's political landscape. This turmoil often stems from a variety of economic, social, and political factors, which we'll delve into now. Economic instability is often a significant catalyst for political turmoil. When a nation's economy falters, unemployment rates rise, inflation soars, and the standard of living plummets, creating a fertile ground for dissatisfaction and unrest. The citizens, feeling the pinch of economic hardship, may revolt against the government, leading to political upheaval. Societal factors also play a role. Deep-seated social inequalities, discrimination, corruption, and lack of access to basic services can all spark discontent and fuel political instability. When a significant portion of the population feels marginalized or ignored, they may rise up against the ruling powers, adding to the turmoil. Lastly, we cannot overlook the role of political factors. Leaders lacking legitimacy, government corruption, and ineffective political institutions can all contribute to political turmoil. When the people lose faith in their leaders and the system, they may resort to protests or even rebellion. These factors often intertwine in a deadly dance, each one exacerbating the other, leading a nation down a slippery slope towards becoming a failed state. A failed state is a political body that has disintegrated to a point where basic conditions and responsibilities of a sovereign government no longer function properly. It's a sobering reality that many nations face today. But by understanding these factors, we can begin to see the patterns, the warning signs, if you will, that hint at a nation's impending downfall. Understanding these factors is key to comprehending the downfall of a nation. Only then can we begin to work towards solutions that prevent political turmoil and the resultant state failure. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this fascinating topic in our next scene. Now, let's delve into a poignant example of a failed state, Somalia. Nestled in the Horn of Africa, Somalia has been a hotbed of political instability for the better part of the last 4 decades. The roots of its turmoil trace back to the late 20th century, when a military coup led by Siad Barre seized power in 1969. Barre's authoritarian regime ruled with an iron fist, suppressing opposition and fostering a climate of fear and mistrust. However, the tipping point arrived in the early 90s. Amid rising public discontent and a collapsing economy, Barre's regime was toppled by a coalition of clan-based armed opposition groups. But the expected dawn of peace and stability never arrived. Instead, the power vacuum left by the fall of Barre's regime gave way to a brutal civil war, with rival factions vying for control. The civil war, combined with a severe famine, led to a humanitarian crisis of unprecedented magnitude. The international community, led by the United Nations, intervened in an attempt to restore peace, but their efforts were largely unsuccessful. The state of Somalia had effectively collapsed. Fast forward to today, and Somalia is still grappling with the aftermath of its devastating civil war. Despite the establishment of a federal government in 2012, the country remains fragmented, with governance and control split among various rival factions. The militant group Al-Shabaab continues to pose a significant threat, carrying out regular attacks and undermining the government's efforts to restore order. So, what led to Somalia's downfall? Well, it was a combination of factors: an authoritarian regime, economic mismanagement, a power vacuum, a brutal civil war, and a lack of effective international intervention. Each of these elements played a role in pushing Somalia to the brink and beyond, into the realm of a failed state. Somalia's tale is a tragic reminder of how political unrest can ravage a nation. But it also serves as a stark warning, highlighting the importance of good governance, economic stability, and international cooperation in preventing state failure. Another telling example of a failed state is Venezuela. A country rich in resources, particularly oil, Venezuela was once one of the wealthiest nations in South America. But today, it stands as a stark example of how political and economic mismanagement can lead a country into chaos. The journey into becoming a failed state began with the rise of Hugo Chavez in the late 90s. Chavez implemented a form of socialism that relied heavily on the country's oil wealth. For a time, the system worked. Oil prices were high and the money was used to fund generous social programs. However, this prosperity was precariously hinged on the volatile oil market. When oil prices plummeted, so did Venezuela's economy. Chávez's successor, Nicolás Maduro, inherited an economy in freefall and a political system rife with corruption and inefficiency. Instead of implementing reforms, Maduro doubled down on Chávez's policies, exacerbating the economic crisis. Hyperinflation, which reached an astounding 1,000,000% in 2018, made the bolívar nearly worthless. Basic necessities like food and medicine became scarce, leading to widespread hunger and a healthcare crisis. The government's response was to print more money, further fueling inflation. The political landscape was equally turbulent. Maduro's government has been accused of numerous human rights abuses and suppressing opposition. In 2019, a power struggle erupted between Maduro and opposition leader Juan Guaidó, leading to further instability. The impact on the citizens of Venezuela has been devastating. Millions have fled the country, creating a refugee crisis in neighboring countries. Those who remain face dire living conditions with limited access to food, healthcare, and basic services. Venezuela's journey into becoming a failed state was not inevitable. It was the result of a series of poor political and economic decisions, made worse by a refusal to implement necessary reforms. The fallout has been felt most acutely by the Venezuelan people, who continue to suffer under a regime that has prioritized its own survival over the welfare of its citizens. Venezuela's situation demonstrates the dire consequences of political and economic mismanagement. It serves as a stark reminder that the road to becoming a failed state is often paved with good intentions, but ultimately leads to hardship and despair. Failed states don't just affect their own citizens, they have far-reaching implications. When we talk about failed states, we're not just talking about a localized issue. The ripple effects of a state's collapse can be felt around the globe, and the consequences are often dire. Imagine a pebble falling into a calm lake. The initial splash may be small, but the ripples spread far and wide. Similarly, a state's failure might seem like a distant issue, but the repercussions echo across continents. One of the most immediate and visible effects is the refugee crisis. When a state fails, its citizens are often left with no choice but to flee their homes in search of safety. This mass exodus can put enormous pressure on neighboring countries, leading to overcrowded refugee camps, strained resources, and heightened tensions. The world has witnessed this scenario play out in regions like the Middle East and Africa. Another grim consequence is the rise of terrorism. Failed states often become breeding grounds for extremist groups, who exploit the chaos and lawlessness to establish strongholds. These groups can pose a significant threat not just to the region, but to global security. Regional instability is yet another repercussion. A failed state can destabilize an entire region, undermining economic growth and progress. Trade routes can be disrupted, investments can become risky, and regional cooperation can be undermined. This instability can hinder global efforts to tackle shared challenges like climate change and poverty. Last but not least, we cannot overlook the humanitarian crisis that often accompanies state failure. Famine, disease, and violence can become widespread, causing immense suffering for the population. These crises require a significant international response, further stretching global resources. The consequences of a failed state are complex and far-reaching. They are a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, a crisis in one corner can quickly become a crisis for us all. It's not just about one nation's struggle, it's about the collective challenges we face as a global community. The domino effect of a state's failure reaches far beyond its borders. Let's remember, when one domino falls, it can set off a chain reaction that topples many more. So, how can the international community prevent states from failing? This is a question that has been asked time and time again, and while there's no one-size-fits-all answer, there are a few strategies that have proven effective. One of the most important measures is international cooperation. States do not exist in isolation, and problems in one country can quickly spill over borders, affecting the global community. By working together, countries can build diplomatic relationships that foster peace and stability. This can be through diplomatic dialogue, conflict resolution, or even peacekeeping missions when necessary. Next, we have economic support. Financial instability is often a major factor in state failure. By providing economic aid, developed countries can help struggling nations stabilize their economies. However, it's not just about giving money. It's about building sustainable economies. This can be achieved through investments in infrastructure, education, and healthcare, which in turn create jobs, reduce poverty, and strengthen the economy. Political intervention can also play a crucial role in preventing state failure. This doesn't necessarily mean military intervention, but rather diplomatic and political efforts to support good governance, uphold human rights, and promote democratic values. Remember, strong institutions and rule of law form the backbone of a stable state. Finally, let's not forget the role of citizens. The people of a nation are its greatest asset. Through education and empowerment, citizens can help prevent state failure. They can advocate for good governance, hold their leaders accountable, and work towards a more just and inclusive society. However, these strategies are not without challenges. International cooperation requires political will, economic support must be sustainable and not foster dependency, and political intervention needs to be sensitive to local contexts. As for the role of citizens, education and empowerment are long-term investments that require time and resources. Preventing state failure requires collective effort and proactive measures, both domestically and internationally. And while there's no guarantee of success, these strategies offer a promising start towards a more stable, peaceful world.